Well, this is always a good show, but I promise you, tonight is going to be a classic. This, at least part of it, will be played, if not forevermore, then for a very, very long time. Because there's an interview with the only substitute we could get. Owen Smith coup leader Andy Slaughter MP for Hammersmith. And I promise you, you've never heard anything quite like it. You can talk to me about Corbyn, about Trump and Clinton, about slavery and the campaign for reparations, and about the role of Britain in illegal renditions and torture. Well, first let me make this official announcement. We contacted Owen Smith's office earlier this week for an interview. After much chasing and early indications it was unlikely to happen, we finally got confirmation late this morning that we would be unable to interview him tonight. But we've already put in a request for him to appear on this show next week. We did have one of his surrogates, a woman called Jane Chapman, MP, Jenny Chapman, MP for Darlington, I think, forgive me. I had forgotten her already. And she gave some startling comments that went wild on the internet and certainly travelled far amongst Labour Party members. But you ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till you hear Andy Slaughter, my own MP, actually. I voted for him last time in the Hammersmith constituency. So we're talking about the ongoing coup against Jeremy Corbyn, which reached its nadir, you might say, in the High Court this week, when the biggest friend of Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel, a Mr. Foster, a multi-millionaire failed Labour candidate under Ed Miliband, took the party to court at vast expense to try and get a High Court judge to throw the leader of the Labour Party off the ballot paper in the contest for the leadership of the Labour Party. Ordinarily, you wouldn't be able to make that kind of story up. But I'm afraid this coup against Corbyn gets curiouser and curiouser. You remember, it's only a couple of weeks ago, that we were told that Angela Eagle would be the finest leader Labour could possibly imagine, and that it was time at last, for a woman leader of the Labour Party. All the propaganda guns were moved into position. All the columnists, especially the feminist ones, like Polly Toynbee in The Guardian, were wheeled out to tell us that Angela Eagle's time has come. And then she was elbowed out of the way by a man called Owen Smith, about whom few of us know much, and he's doing his best to make sure that the very large audience of this radio programme at least don't get to know very much at all, because he's running and hiding from an appearance on this show. But I have to tell you, in the words of the then Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, when he went looking for the big ugly bear, Sonny Liston, we're coming after you, Owen. And don't be surprised if I pop up with a microphone for Talk Radio just when you least expect it, because I'm giving up hope that you're going to have the courage as the leader of the chicken coup to come in front of this show. So we're talking about that. We're talking about America. We're talking to the sage, John Le Boutillier, who talks us through the American political season. We talked last week about the madness that is Donald Trump, and this week we'll be talking about the, well, if not madness, badness of Hillary Clinton, who's just been selected, low in very controversial circumstances indeed, as the Democratic Party's candidate for president. And we'll be talking about a very vexed issue, which is already causing vexation on my Twitter feed, when I put out that I would be talking tonight to the leaders of the campaign for reparations, for the slave trade and Britain's preeminent role in it. I expect it because I've done this kind of show before, I expected the kind of inane, asinine blowback from people who, though they would never admit it, maybe even to themselves, don't quite see what the big deal about slavery actually is. Well, here's what it is to me. Slavery was the greatest crime in human history. It was the greatest crime in human history because it spanned over centuries and affected tens of millions of people who were stolen from their land and their loved ones and chained and put into the holds of leaking, unstable ships and sailed across the 7 seas and put to work in the fields as beasts of burden, as the property of others. And those others are manifold. There were many countries involved, but our country was preeminent. We took more slaves from Africa than anybody else. We sold human beings as beasts of burden to plantation owners all over the Americas and the islands of the Caribbean. And the horrors, the bestial horrors of the slave trade is virtually forgotten, in my experience, amongst people in this country. And nobody does very much to bring it to public's attention. Well, I'm never going to be found wanting on that. Of course, our own people, our own working people, were not chained to the factory floor in the Industrial Revolution, but were subjected to remorseless exploitation, which kept them on the cusp of hunger and immiseration. And it's true that there were other slavers before us. Like that makes our role any more edifying. I'm here to tell you that we were at the centre of the greatest crime in human history. And you know what? We haven't paid a penny to those who suffered as a result of that great crime. On the contrary, we're still paying those who gave up their slaves when we eventually abolished that evil, vile trade. And some very famous people were compensated in huge sums for giving up their slaves, their human beings that they had as beasts of burden. Amongst them was David Cameron's own family. It's one of the reasons why some of his wealth was out there in the Caribbean, in the Cayman Islands and in the Panama Papers. All kinds of fortunes that you know today and recognize today in Bristol, in Glasgow, in London, were built on the blood, sweat, and tears, oh so many tears, of millions upon millions of enslaved people. Now, I myself will not rest until everybody in this country knows everything about that. I myself will not rest until due compensation and reparation for that crime has been made. And if you want to argue that with me, then come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. So we're talking Britain, and we're talking America, and we're talking the Caribbean in between, and we're talking Africa. Not content with invading and occupying Africa and carrying off everything that we could steal, we even stole the people themselves. Can you imagine? And by the way, this ain't ancient history. I'm old enough to have been able to talk to and with people whose fathers and mothers were slaves. Think about that. This isn't ancient Greco-Roman history. This is something that happened in the modern history of our state. Now, thanks to many campaigners, of course, it's true that we were the first to outlaw the trade, but not before we'd made a right pretty penny out of it. So, let me have your point of view. I'm saying we need to pay reparations. I'm saying that the next time you're walking down the road and there's a black fellow behind you and you're feeling a little bit nervous, just remember this. He has far more reason to be nervous about you than you have to be nervous about him. Now we're talking about the coup against Corbyn. In the first hour, Labour leadership contender Owen Smith caused controversy earlier this week as he made a major policy speech in Rotherham, attacking Theresa May.
And I'll be honest with you, it pained me that we didn't have the strength and the power and the vitality to smash her back on her heels and argue that these are our values, these are our people, this is our language that they are seeking to steal.
He was forced to apologise after he was accused of using misogynistic and aggressive language towards the Prime Minister.
I'm a robust politician and I will use robust language, but I was talking obviously about the rhetoric from the Tory party, the ideology of the Tory party, the ideas of the Tory party, not the person of Theresa May.
Well, he never uses one word when 100 will do. Meanwhile, in an interview with Sky News, Mr Smith talked about the problems with misogyny that are rife, he said, in the Labour Party and in the UK on the whole.
I think we've seen a growth of misogyny in the party. That's definitely true. We've seen, rape threats against women. All of these things should be deeply concerning to us. And I think we have seen more intolerance, greater racism in the country at large. Now, that's something we've got to try and change. We can change that through legislation. We can change it through change in culture.
In an appearance on Newsnight on Monday, he was forced to justify his place in the leadership competition after claims that the foundations of his campaign were shaking.
Well, I think Jeremy, to be honest, doesn't really understand sometimes the way in which people have a very strong, perhaps socially conservative with a small c, sense of place, sense of where they're from. I'm not sure I've heard him talking much about Scotland and identity, or about Wales and identity, or indeed about England and identity. I suspect that Jeremy's got a rather more metropolitan sense of that, and that's not one I think is central to the Labour tradition.
Are you calling him unpatriotic?
I'm saying that I think it's not something that is core to his set of beliefs. I think he's got a set of liberal perspectives and left perspectives on things, and nationhood and nationalism and patriotism aren't really part of his makeup. I think the truth is that the reason I stood was in order to try and unite the Labour Party. We had obviously a massive crisis of confidence in the Parliamentary Labour Party in Jeremy. The job of the leader of the Labour Party is to lead united opposition at Westminster, or to lead a government at Westminster. He couldn't do that. Most of those MPs now have nominated me overwhelmingly to challenge Jeremy.
Well, that was the man himself. As I said earlier, we gave him every opportunity all week and all last week too to come on this show, but he was unable to make it. However, just like last week, he did put someone up to speak for him. My own MP, actually, Andy Slaughter, the Member of Parliament for Hammersmith. I give you this fair warning. You've never heard anything quite like this. Andy Slaughter, what's a nice guy like you getting involved in a thing like this coup?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Yeah.
The coup against the Labour leader. You may have read about it.
No, I think you're misunderstanding there, George. This is a leadership election in the Labour Party.
It's a challenge to a leader that's only been in 10 months. That's usually described as a coup, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you can use whatever emotive language you want, but it's perfectly within the rules for there to be a challenge.
Well, let me tell you what I mean. You're a big supporter of the Palestinians. How do you feel about the fact that every supporter of Israel in the land is rooting for Corbyn's political demise?
I really think that if that's the sort of attitude you're going to take to this, then we're not going to have a very sensible conversation.
Are you ending the conversation, Andy?
No, I'm not ending the conversation. I'm just saying, I mean, what I was asked to do was to come and comment on the Labour leadership campaign, which is, I'm sure it's something that you're familiar with, that it's a contest between Owen Smith and Jeremy Corbyn to be the better
but I'm asking
leader
you
of the
why.
Labour Party and then Prime Minister.
I'm asking you why you're involved in it, and I gave you one reason why I'm asking you. I'm asking you because you're a supporter of the Palestinians, but every single supporter of Israel in the land is rooting for Jeremy Corbyn's defeat and working hard for it. How do you feel about that?
That's a curious angle to take, if you don't mind my saying. I certainly don't accept the premise there. There are all sorts of reasons why people would be supporting either Owen or Jeremy for the contest.
I'm trying to rescue you from what I promise you will be a YouTube car crash. Let me ask you then a different question.
I'm sorry, I don't even understand what you mean by that.
You will. If Owen Smith is, as he now claims to be, just as radical as Jeremy Corbyn, why are Peter Mandelson, Alistair Campbell, Tim Allen, Portland Communications, and I could go on, why are they backing him?
I think, you live in this weird world of conspiracy theory, George. Most of us don't. And, I'm not really sure what this programme is that you do. I thought this was a straightforward interview on radio stations I was doing here. So, either ask me some sensible questions or we will end the interview.
Well, the listeners will judge who's being sensible and who's being obtuse or even semi-comatose in this interview. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you a legitimate question that a very large audience will be listening to very soon. And it's this.
I don't know whether that's true or not.
I can assure you that it's true, and you're going to find out just how true it is. Why are Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell supporting your candidate, Owen Smith?
Well, I don't have regular conversations with either Peter Mandelson or Alistair Campbell. You may well do, I don't know. There may be the circles that you move in, I don't know.
Have you had a wee pre-prandial?
Sorry, I don't... George, is this a sort of spoof interview or something of that kind? Because I think
it's definitely sounds like a spoof from your end. Let's leave it there. That's Owen Smith's spokesman, Andy Slaughter, the MP for Hammersmith.
Your career, George. Bye bye.
Well, there you go. I'm not sure that Owen will consider that to have been the finest innings batted on his behalf in this campaign, but it shows, I think, along with his own shaky performance on Newsnight, just how shaky the foundations of this entire challenge to Jeremy Corbyn are. This man, Andy Slaughter, has been a Member of Parliament for almost 30 years, and he seemed incapable of even coming to terms with the fact that he was speaking down a radio line to me. Perhaps he thought it would be another of these BBC-type patsy interviews where the interviewer puts up a silver platter on which Owen Smith and his surrogates can put any nonsense that they like. But that's not how we work at Talk Radio, and it's definitely not how we work on the mother of all talk shows. My points to him were clear enough, I hope you'll agree, and legitimate. Andy Slaughter has dined out for almost 30 years on being one of the country's supporters of the Palestinian people. Yet he would not even answer my question about the fact that those who take the absolutely diametrically opposite point of view on this subject are all on his side. He wouldn't answer that because he can't answer that, because there is no answer. Owen Smith is currently posing as a kind of young man's Michael Foot. He's trying to persuade us that he's a candidate of the left. He's trying to say, indeed he has said, explicitly, that he's as left-wing as Jeremy Corbyn. And therefore the question, if he's so left-wing, why is Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell and Tim Allen and Portland Communications, and I could go on and on and on, why are they all involved in his campaign? Are they campaigning for a new left-wing leader of the Labour Party? Are they campaigning for someone who's going to challenge the very corporate power at whose teats they all suck so profitably? If you believe that, there's a bridge just along the river here that you might be interested in buying off me. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. Now, Andy thought that he could skate through this interview, but he couldn't avoid the truth, which is this: all the worst people in the land, all of them, not everybody that's supporting Smith is bad, but all the worst people in the land are trying to destroy Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. All the media moguls, all the business heads, all the corporate journalists, all the Blairites, all the warmongers, all the defenders of the past 15 or 20 years of war and rendition and torture and occupation are all on the side of Owen Smith. That's something that cannot be gainsaid. There's no getting away from that. And that tells me this: if all these people hate Jeremy Corbyn, that's a pretty good reason for the rest of us to like him. Well, let me know what you thought of the mother of all car crash interviews. And I thought it was symptomatic of the absolute loss of moorings of the campaign to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn. They couldn't agree on a candidate. None of the frontline candidates that stood last time came forward. None of the bigger names that didn't stand last time but definitely want to be leader of the Labour Party came forward. So they produced from a hat Angela Eagle. They told us she was the best thing since sliced bread. 2 whole weeks of it we had to endure. Then she was ditched in favour of another guy, a former corporate lobbyist with Pfizer, the multinational pharmaceuticals company, which company gave, by the way, £55,000 in a donation to a Labour Party organisation. Imagine, an organisation called Progress, which is fully behind the campaign of Mr. Smith. So then they had to start again. They began by telling us that Corbyn's policies were so unrepresentative that they presided over, they presented a case for unelectability, and then he reinvented himself as someone just as left-wing as Jeremy Corbyn. You really couldn't make it up. Let's hear from the listeners. John is on the phone in Carmarthen in Wales. John,
hello.
Welcome.
Hi, George, how are you? Now, look, I joined the Labour Party because I believe Jeremy Corbyn's going to win the election and he's the best man for the job. And what's wrong with the Labour Party goes back to Neil Kinnock getting demolished by the Tory press.
Yeah, well, that's a fair point. I mean, all Labour leaders have a hard time with the Tory press. Even Owen Smith, if he should ever be the leader of the Labour Party.
I don't think Owen Smith will ever make it. I spoke to one of the Corbyn survey people who were checking out my membership and who I'll vote for, and they told me that there was a rock-solid vote behind Jeremy Corbyn. I think, the Blair Project was the beginnings of getting Rupert Murdoch to write nice things about him, and then we had Gordon Brown going to the Daily Mail, please, what policy would you like me to introduce so that you can write nice things about me? And the Daily Mail said, well, can you change cannabis from category C to category B? And Gordon Brown duly did it. And this is the kind of problem with the Labour Party, is that they have their own strength of character, and that's what Jeremy Corbyn is attracting people on, that he has his own values, strength of character, the people know what they're going to get if they vote for him. And as you say, with Owen Smith, we just really don't know what he's about at all.
Well, I couldn't put it better, John, in Carmarthen. Thanks very much for that excellent call. Sarah's on the line. She's in Cambridge. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Oh, hello, George.
Hi.
I thought that interview with Andy Slaughter was jaw-dropping. He's a bit lacking in the sense of humour department.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd woken him up or he'd had a wee drink before dinner or...
Possibly.
I've no idea. I've never heard anything quite like it.
No, me. I wanted to say, yes, ringing from Cambridge. In Cambridge, we have a Labour MP, Daniel Zeisner. He has a majority of 600 from the last election. He did not take part in the PLP coup, the chicken coup, as you call it. He didn't, because you have to be a bit careful in Cambridge. You know, that would have been a little tricky. But last week he came out, it's in the paper, that he is not supporting Jeremy in the leadership election. He's supporting Owen Smith. And I wrote to him, basically, you've shown your hand, Daniel, really. He hadn't the guts to join in the coup, but he's done it in this underhand way. He is a great supporter of Israel, you're quite right. And I just wanted to add that, in my opinion, this coup is a deliberate scorched earth policy. The establishment, the neocons, the Globe, the corporates are desperate to stop Jeremy becoming leader and prime minister, and they'll cause total destruction, as I say, scorched earth, anything to stop it. That's the only way to explain it, because otherwise, why now? So I'm very supportive of the line you're taking on this. And
well, thanks, Sarah. I've never heard of your MP. Who's in second place, 600 votes behind?
Julian Huppert. He was the Lib Dem MP for quite a long time. Very popular, very good, hard-working constituents MP. And he was pipped to the post by Zeisner, who is not in
Because I'll tell you why I'm asking. Because there was an MP in Cambridge before the war, who supported the war.
Yes, he said afterwards, Iraq cost me my seat.
Well,
I thought, Iraq
it cost her a seat and it cost 1 million people their life's blood.
That's what I said to George. Well, that lost her a seat. Yes, it did. Just these MPs, they show themselves this lack of moral courage, moral fibre, and people are seeing through it, you know. So just wanted to let you know. I'm
grateful to you, as always, a very eloquent contribution from Cambridge.
Can I quickly add one thing?
Yes.
2 weeks ago, a group of us formed a protest against the presence here of Madeleine Albright, who came to speak at a Cambridge Cambridge University Department of Politics lecture with the Republican Vin Weber, and we basically gathered at the entrance to the department where it was and had our banner, 5,000 children, the price worth paying, and we shouted, I can't bear this, the thought of this woman. And
yes.
Anyway, she saw us, and a friend of mine shook her head at her, basically, what you've done is wrong, and this tiny little figure at the back of the posh car shook her head back. So at least she saw us, we made
Yes,
the point.
very good. She's the one, as you say, that said on television, on ABC, to Leslie Stahl, the interviewer, who said to her, 550,000 Iraqi children have died as a result of your sanctions. Do you think that's a price worth paying?
It's just terrible, George.
And Madeleine Albright infamously answered, we think it's tough. We think it's a price worth
It's appalling.
paying.
These people are psychopaths. That is what's so terrifying, and that's what's so terrifying about Hillary Clinton. But I dare say you'll be coming.
We'll be coming on to that, and so I hear that Madeleine Albright's still going. Only the good die young. Right enough. Thanks for that, Sarah in Cambridge. Josie sends a tweet. Not one for listening to radio, but glued to talk radio, just so I can hear George Galloway put the boot into the Labour coup. And Shout says the Bill O'Reilly factor thinks it was a noble state, provided they were fed and housed. I don't quite know what that means. Ray, welcome back.
Good evening, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you.
Can I say, first of all, R.I.P. to Davy Hopper.
A great miners' leader, laid to rest today. Yes.
A great man indeed. After this High Court ruling this week, Mr. Nobody has got two chances against Jeremy Corbyn. None and Slim. And Slim is out of town.
Very good. Very
right?
Good.
Could I say something about slavery, George?
Yes, please do.
These racist people in this world should realise that the first people on this earth were black people. And we're all descendants from black people.
Yep.
They came from Ethiopia. Am I right?
You're absolutely correct.
But the ironic thing is, George, do you know who wrote the song, the beautiful song Amazing Grace?
Yes.
John Newton.
Indeed.
A slave ship captain.
Yes.
You know, it's crazy, isn't it? The crazy world.
Crazy world indeed. Ray, thanks as always. Lovely to hear your mellifluous voice from Pontypridd. Greg is in Glasgow. I don't know if he's mellifluous. We'll soon find out. On you go, Greg.
No, I've only had a few drinks tonight, George. No, I'm totally sober.
Go ahead,
I think I have one question for you, George, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Who would Rupert Murdoch like to be the Labour leader?
Owen Smith.
Who would he?
Owen Smith.
Absolutely not. I disagree. Disagree wholeheartedly. Because with Jeremy Corbyn as a leader, I think that he will certainly feel, as the Conservative Party undoubtedly feel just now, that Labour will be unelectable to Middle England.
Well, why are all the right wing? Wait a minute, Greg. I'll let you back in. Why are all the right wing papers attacking Corbyn across page after page after page every single day? Why?
Because he's a farce. He does not represent.
But you've just said they want him to be the leader. So why are they attacking him?
That's two different things.
No, it's not two different things. You said you hadn't had a drink, but you're actually not making sense, Greg. Look, you said that Mr. Murdoch and the other moguls want Jeremy Corbyn to win, in which case, why aren't they supporting him in this election campaign?
Well, why aren't the Conservative Party supporting Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, exactly.
Why are they attacking him?
Well, don't you see how illogical what you're arguing is?
No, it's not illogical at all.
If the Tories and the right-wing press wanted Corbyn to continue as leader of the Labour Party, why are they all ceaselessly, endlessly, ferociously attacking him every day and all day?
I think he's getting a very soft ride from them. I don't think he's getting attacked anything like what he could be. In the same way that the Tories attack him in a half-hearted way, hoping... I mean, David Cameron was barely concealing giggles at question time.
Greg, you're having a laugh here. Is this a spoof? Is this one of these spoof calls? You're arguing out the other end. You're talking out your other end. Let me put it politely. Your argument is completely contradictory. You're telling me that Mr. Murdoch wants Jeremy Corbyn to win the Labour leadership, yet you have to acknowledge that every one of his papers is remorselessly attacking Corbyn every day and all day.
I don't think that's the case. I think they remorselessly attack you in the same way, but they know fine well, and they give you airtime, and they give you column inches in the fact that you hurt the Labour Party in the same way.
I'll tell you why people give me airtime, Greg.
Because you're entertainment, and you are a very intelligent man.
Because
reasoned arguments.
I bring a big audience. That's all. That's all. And as long as nobody interferes with my work, I'll work on any platform. I've made that point over and over again. Greg, it's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Thanks for your call. Let me deal with some of the written material that's coming up here. Slavery. Amar Cricket, FT Cricket, talking about slavery, says, unfortunately, slavery still exists in some parts of the subcontinent, and not just there, Amar. Ford says, I find that some people get uncomfortable when you talk about slavery and what it has done for this country. Ford, you are absolutely right, and you're going to see more of that, I think, later in the show. Let's see. Jane A. says, the Andy Slaughter interview is radio gold, George. And Colin says, Owen Smith, in his Pfizer background, thinks he provides stiff opposition. How funny. That is one of these Viagra jokes. What is Viagra, anyway? What does it look like? Somebody said it's blue. Jeremy Corbyn's recent interview with Owen Jones gave such a well-balanced response to important questions. He's a class above Owen Smith. Owen Smith, Owen Jones, how can you tell? The difference. CMAC59 says, it's a coup. The chicken coors have failed. Despite the mainstream media and the millionaires behind them, he could not put a sentence together. And Satjinder says, Corbyn's slaughter was quite literally slaughtered. If he is actually Smith's press officer, I think he's doomed. Well, Satjinder, he's not his press officer. Andy Slaughter is one of the leaders of the coup against Jeremy Corbyn. He's one of the top parliamentary men in Owen Smith's corner. And if that tonight was the best that he could do, then you have to say, I mean, I get the impression all the time. I got it on Newsnight the other night watching Smith himself. These people have lost the plot. They're being abandoned by the traditional Blair and Brownite leaders in the Parliament. There's no Andy Burnham. There's no Yvette Cooper. There's no Chuka Umunna. There's no Dan Jarvis. There's no Liz Kendall. All the people that became at least moderately well known in the country are nowhere in this coup. This is a second or third rank coup. This is a coup of the very lower grades. And you saw that in Smith's interview on Newsnight, and you heard it in Slaughter's interview with me tonight. They simply cannot stand up to examination. And, well, I mean, frankly, they'd be better chucking it now. They'd be better throwing in the towel. This entire thing was predicated on Corbyn not being allowed to stand. This entire coup was based on the possibility, they thought probability, that Corbyn would be unable to get the nominations, to get on the ballot paper. And when that failed because of an 18-14 vote on the Labour National Executive, all of their hopes were then pinned on a High Court judge. Now, the High Court judge had more sense than those leading the anti-Corbyn coup. The High Court judge knew that the consequences for British democracy, the consequences for the political system in this country would be so grave if a High Court judge threw the leader of the Labour Party out of his position. And the judge didn't take long to make up his mind, and he kicked it out the park. And the multimillionaire, Mr. Foster, probably won't even notice the bill, but it was a very, very, very big bill. Kira Robinson says, I think Hammersmith Andy, oh, that's his handle, at Hammersmith Andy, made a fool of himself on your show on Talk Radio. He's like most MPs now, they don't answer questions. And Josie says, that was brilliant. I found it funny. He must have thought he was on You're Being Framed. That's very good. I'll be talking about Big Brother, by the way, later in the show. I see Celebrity Big Brother has started again. I'll give you some insights on what that whole thing is like. Mark Turner says, I find it bizarre. I've never agreed with a word I've heard George Galloway say, but I'm thoroughly enjoying his talk radio show and agree with every word. Thanks for that, Mark. Trust me, there's a lot of people in your position. Dominic Virgo says, this won't happen, hopefully, George. I think a political change is starting to happen, and Jeremy has brought that. Well, he has, you know, and it's got to this stage. What's that guy, the BBC's political correspondent? I can't remember his name. He's a nobody. He's sort of second in the tier on the BBC's political correspondent thing. He was up at Leeds filming a rally of supporters of Jeremy Corbyn that was, number one, packed to the gunnels. It was ecstatic in its spirit. His popularity, vibrant, vibrating. The walls were vibrating with the support for Corbyn in this rally. And so, unable to deny that which was in front of his own eyes and in front of his own camera, he made a slight turn and said, well, you can see that a lot of Labour MPs are quite nervous at the personality cult that Jeremy Corbyn has built up. So, If you're unpopular, you're unpopular. If you're popular, you're a personality cult. The fact that there's no other politician in this entire country can fill halls from Land's End to John O'Groats with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of supporters. The fact that Corbyn now leads the biggest Labour Party that has ever existed on this island. The fact that Corbyn is the leader of the largest Labour and Social Democratic Party in the entire world, and all of it in just 10 months, in all of which 10 months, he's been being stabbed in the back, in the side, and occasionally in the front by his own MPs. Just imagine if this coup, which has been a slow-motion coup, had not been mounted, and everybody had got behind Corbyn. Instead of 600,000 members of the Labour Party, you'd probably have 1 million now, and the polls would be better, and the meetings and rallies bigger, more vibrant, and the Tories would be knocking their knees together nervously. The other Harry Cole says they are mandated to do what their master says. The warmongering bloody corporatists. Andy Slaughter is just sheeple. And Sir Thomas Twaddle says the interview with Slaughter was astonishing. This is a so-called MP. He needs to think about retirement. Well, do you know what, Sir Thomas? I live in his constituency. Interesting. And Texter says, from a mobile number, no name, talk, excellent show tonight, George. I hear it's Tom in Halifax. Thanks for that, Tom. Michael in Leeds says, George, we want a good fight on the right. I hope the Labour coup realises it is doomed to fail. And Peter in Glasgow says, George, Greg is a numpty. Now, that'll be Greg that called me up earlier. I wouldn't say numpty, Peter. He was wrong. But we've all been wrong once or twice. I was wrong about 1978, I think. Is Mr. Smith the best candidate they can put up? Asks Moses. Well, I've got to say, Moses, if you don't know, how can any of the rest of us? Now, Dominic Grieve, Member of Parliament, was a very stand-up, straight Attorney General. Would that all recent Attorney Generals had had the same integrity as him, and I say that even though he's a Conservative. He's just received a letter in the capacity he now holds, which is Chair of the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee, from another upstanding parliamentarian, Andy Tyree, on the subject of rendition and Britain's role therein. Now, Mr. Grieve has very generously, graciously interrupted his holiday to talk briefly to us, and I'm grateful to him for that. Dominic, thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, you've got this letter from Andy Tyree, who has basically alleged that what we have been told, that Britain had clean hands on the whole rendition, dismal, grubby, sordid rendition business, in which people were kidnapped, essentially, that's what the mafia call it, and flown to places where they could be tortured, that Britain had more of a role in that than has hitherto been admitted by the Labour government ministers at the time. How are you going to deal with such a letter?
Andrew Tyree is absolutely right to raise his concerns about this. It's a legitimate subject of concern, has been raised in Parliament before. The Prime Minister, having asked a retired judge, Sir Peter Gibson, to look at documents, Sir Peter then had to stop his inquiry because there was the possibility of criminal prosecution. And the Prime Minister then, David Cameron, asked the Intelligence and Security Committee to look at what Sir Peter Gibson had found and to pursue his inquiry. And this we are now doing. Now, all I can really say about it is this. I'm satisfied that we are getting the documents and the evidence that we need at present to do the inquiry. If at any stage I were to conclude that we weren't, then firstly I would raise it with a new Prime Minister. Secondly, if necessary, I would go to Parliament and say that we weren't able to do our work. But what I've said to Andrew Tyree is that we will carry on with our work, and I hope that we will be able to come up with a conclusive report in the not too distant future, although we are, I should emphasise, far from finished with this work. The question as to whether what gets published or put in the public domain is not a matter within my authority. It's for the government and not for me. But what I've said to him is that I'm satisfied that we can do the inquiry at the moment. And if I were at any stage to feel that we couldn't, because we weren't getting what we wanted, then I'd probably tell him, but I would also tell Parliament, and I'd certainly be telling the new Prime Minister.
Will you deal with, has anyone dealt with, forgive me, I'm a bit behind the pace on it, deal with the issue, which I heard with my own ears and saw with my own eyes in the House, the former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, saying at the dispatch box that no rendition flights had touched down on any British territory, flying people on their way to be tortured, a fact which later turned out to be untrue. He may or he may not have known that when he made that statement. But will anyone be held to account for the fact that at least one piece of British territory, Diego Garcia, and maybe another, Prestwick Airport, were indeed used as part of the transition of people to the torture chambers?
It's part of our inquiry to look at the evidence that the United Kingdom was involved in rendition, and I should emphasise in saying that, involved in rendition either unwittingly or wittingly. That would include flights through British sovereign territory, and we will be able, I trust, to look at all that, and if there are areas within that where there is a lack of evidence, then we will be able to identify if such evidence is lacking. But as I say, as matters stand at the moment, of having any evidence withheld from us by the government. So I hope very much that we will be able to include that in our report.
And last question, because I know that you're on holiday. If you are not satisfied with your access to documents and witnesses, will you tell us? Will you tell the public?
I think it's certain that if we were unhappy that or felt that we could not conclude our inquiry, then the committee would conclude collectively, and remember, it's a cross-party committee with representation from 3 political parties and the cross-benches. We would undoubtedly refuse to conclude our inquiry. I mean, we're not about to publish something which is inadequate or which we are not satisfied with with the evidence presented to us. How we would go about that, I mean, clearly we would have to speak to the Prime Minister if I was unhappy that something was being withheld from us. I think ultimately Parliament would have to be informed that we were not in a position to produce a report, and I would have thought there would likely be political fallout from that occurring.
Dominic Grieve, you're an officer and a gentleman. Thanks for joining us on your holiday on Talk Radio. That's Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, now chair of the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee. Note to Andy Slaughter, that is how you respond to questions on the radio. Let's go to Mark in Liverpool.
You're okay?
Yes, I'm great. Thanks very much, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, listen, I'm very disappointed with you, and I'll tell you why now. Let me start off by saying I'm a fan of Jeremy Corbyn. I rate the man and I rate his politics. And what the media have done to him is an absolute stain on the word journalism. It's absolutely embarrassing. But this is what I want to say, mate. At the end of the day, it's down to an opinion and the opinion we have. I do not believe Jeremy Corbyn will rid us of a Tory government, which is issue number 1. And that's what it really comes down to, George. And I don't think you were fair with Andy Slaughter earlier. I really don't. I don't think you should. We were listening there, and we wanted to hear that progress and go forward and maybe clear the air a little bit. Don't forget, we're all not plugged into the system like you are, mate. You know what I mean? So it's important that that interview happens for our beloved Labour Party, and I'm just disappointed. Also, let me say a couple of things regarding the war, and I did a talk yesterday with some girl that I'm not voting Labour over this Trident lark. Wait a minute. You're not going to vote for the Labour Party over this Trident debacle. Even though Jeremy Corbyn's against Trident, but what the party's done. But what about the social issues? What about our drug-riddled estates in our communities? and you're going to pick a subject like that, and I understand it's a big subject, and it was one that was close to the girl's heart, but it's like you're passing right over all the social issues for that issue, and it's starting to get on my nerves now, George.
Well, look, and I'm always sorry to disappoint my friends in Liverpool. I'm there on the 7th of August, by the way, showing my film, The Killings of Tony Blair, at the Fact Cinema. Come along to that, and we can maybe continue this conversation. So I'm sorry that I disappointed you, but I want to press you on one or two important points.
Okay.
You say that Corbyn can't win a general election.
No.
But nobody has given him a chance to prove otherwise. But there have been 4 parliamentary by-elections since he became leader 10 months ago. All 4 of them were won, 3 of the 4 by substantially increased majorities. Labour won the mayoralty in London, they won the mayoralty in Bristol, they captured seats all over the country and beat the Tories at the local elections in May. All of this despite the fact that there has been a coup going on from the day and hour that Corbyn was elected. Now, were you as impatient with the last guy, Miliband? Were you as impatient with him? Because he was a turkey, if you ask me, and so the electorate thought. Were you as impatient with the guy before him, Gordon Brown, who never won an election, ever, even though he got handed the prime ministership on a plate? Why are you holding Corbyn to the fire already when he's won every election that's been put in front of him? He's made your party bigger than it has ever been in its entire history, and it's the biggest Labour Party in the whole world. Why are you being so hard on Corbyn?
George, I'm not being hard on him. You've got to realise, this hurts me to say this. The man's closer to my beliefs than any of the other politicians you stepped forward. Just in me heart, I don't believe he's the right man.
Well, let me
George, can I finish, mate, please?
Yeah.
I think he's talking to the converted, for one. I think it's a movement, and it's a great movement to see. It's refreshing, that especially all the hard boys. I go down the club, and all the hard lads, all the hard lads, have got a spring in the step, mate. A spring in the step. But what I'm saying to you is this press are going to murder him. They're going to rinse him. And my main issue is to rid us of a Tory government.
But look, are you going to let the press choose the leader then?
No, I'm not choosing my leader, mate.
Well, look, if you say that the press are going to murder him, so we'll need to murder him first. That's essentially what you're saying.
Well, no, not at all, because I'm not listening to them. Listen, I don't even read. No, I'll be honest with you, the only time I read the damn right is when I'm in prison, and on a Sunday I get the Sunday Times, and that. They're the only time I read them. I don't go near them, mate. They're not my type of people. But it's not me you have to appeal to. Just said you're talking to the converted, George.
All right.
You know
so
what I mean?
The only time you read the press is when you're in prison, and you read the Sunday Times, and you're trying to tell me that actually you're a Corbyn man. You just think that he's got to go. We've got to murder him before the Tories and the government and the media murder him. That's one of the stranger conversations I've ever had. Well, are you? Are you hard enough? I'm only joking. I'm not going to bite your head off, even if I profoundly disagree with you. I'm like the last fellow who only reads the newspapers when he's in prison. William says, George, what a strange man Andy Slaughter was. It's been a long time coming, but I really believe you and others are breakers of the MSM cartel. And Leyland Brooks says, Owen Smith postures himself as a champion of the working class and shows respect for JC. He out-Corbyn's Corbyn. That's why Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell are supporting him, of course. And Leyland again says, Owen Smith appears strong and sounds legitimate. What is his track record in Parliament? Not much. I think Smith is Lee Harvey Oswald, the patsy. That's why they're using the third tier. Well, metaphorically, maybe. Damien, the legend, is in Brighton, and he's on the line. Damien, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Hi.
George, I wanted to talk about feminism in relation to the leadership contest. But could I just make a very brief comment about Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Now, his heart just wasn't in it, listening to him earlier, and he came across, if I'm going to be quite honest, as rather gormless. The plotters have sought to destabilise Her Majesty's opposition, so in that sense it could be argued that they're actually in breach of their covenant with the constituents who voted for them, because those constituents voted for them to be returned to Parliament to oppose the Conservative Party.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else, Damien, I'll let you back in a second.
Yeah, sure.
99% of them got elected because they were the Labour candidate. Not more than 1% of them got elected because of who they were. They got elected because they had a Labour rosette, period.
They were funded, supported, selected as Labour candidates, and this is how they repay that debt, George. But there's a positive side to this, because these dishonourable plotters have abdicated their duties. Of course, it leaves an excellent opportunity to ambitious, independent-minded Labour MPs who want to make a difference to fast-track their political careers and get some front-bench experience to prepare them for government. So we've already seen that one's returned, and there's some great career opportunities there for people who want to step forward and really make a difference in the country. But the reason I called, George, was about feminism. Now, of all the ideologies, I think that I'm in most agreement with feminism, and I hold it in very high regard, because if you look at the history of feminism with the suffragettes, who were beaten, lost their lives, and were force-fed because of their beliefs, the Labour Party, and their belief is, I mean, what is feminism? I mean, feminism, if you look at it essentially, the very core of feminism is equality for all. It's the front line of the fight for equality for men, women, for everybody. And so the Labour Party, which is founded on the principle of equality, is the home for feminism. You know, I mean, I would argue. Now, that's why it saddens me that we have Owen Smith, who only this week said that he would like to smash a woman to her heels. This isn't the first...
It was rather violent imagery, wasn't it?
Well, it's not the first violent metaphor that Owen Smith has used against women, George. He also described the result of the Liberal Democrats going into coalition with the Conservatives as akin to a battered wife putting makeup on after a beating. Now, what I simply can't understand, George, is why women like Jess Phillips, Yvette Cooper and Jenny Chapman are supporting Owen Smith, who is a man who trivialises violence against women.
Well, I don't know if I wouldn't go that far, because I don't know. I bow to your superior knowledge on this. I do know that he told the leader of Plaid Cymru on the microphone, on television, that the only reason she was on television so much was because she was a woman. If Jeremy Corbyn had said any one of the three things that you and I have adumbrated this evening, he would be being pinned against the wall as a misogynist, as virtually a wife-beater himself. Yet Smith did say these things, and yet he is the candidate of the so-called feminists in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and indeed in the media, the Polly Toynbees and the army of people like her. That shows how desperate they are to get rid of Corbyn, doesn't it? Because they can't seriously in their heart think that Owen Smith is the real deal.
I find the use of language by Owen Smith deeply troubling, and I'm not sure how they are reconciling it with a left-wing position. I think it all boils down to, and I think it's worth repeating, is that Jeremy Corbyn is placing the interests of the public of the UK above corporate interests. and that is simply unacceptable to the right-wing clique of plotters who have set about trying to topple him from his position.
Damien, as always, absolutely brilliant. Thanks very much. Donald MacLeod writes, George, you could have given the poor fellow a chance to get off his stool. An early first-round knockout was too quick altogether. Well, maybe you've got a point there, Donald. Richard Tyne says, George, hope you and yours are well. Been a busy few months, but I'm enjoying putting my feet up and listening to Talk Radio tonight. Thank you, Richard. Stay in touch, pal. Don't be a stranger. The Duke says, hilarious, clearly only used to being stroked by the BBC. They don't like it up 'em. Well, some of them do, actually, Duke. Michael says, fantastic to hear your dulcet brogue back on the radio, George. Great to hear MP slaughtered by your good self. Please, can we have some more? Indeed, you can, and there's much more where this came from. I'll be talking after the break to a woman who is one of the leaders of the campaign to bring to the fore, and I'm involved in this campaign, the need to make reparation to the descendants of the slave trade on which Britain grew fat and rich. And, of course, some people benefited more than others, but Britain's public realm, Britain's national wealth, was bloated immeasurably, unrecognisably, by the trade in human beings whom we stole off their land and from the beseeching arms of their loved ones. We chained them into ships. Listen to Ziggy Marley and Redemption Song if you want to know poetically and musically what I am talking about. I was on the march, started in Brixton last summer, and if I can, I'll be on the next march. And the person I'm going to be talking to, Juliet Ryan, is a project manager for the Working Action Group, which is campaigning for reparations for the black community. Some people say it's a controversial issue. For me, it's not rocket science. We owe, big time, all those who suffered as a result of the slave trade that made our country rich.
Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind.
Well, what a pleasant, happy, delightful surprise. My producers found that track in seconds after I mentioned it. It is a truly majestic song. And it tells a story so epic that no motion picture could ever do justice to it. It is the most shameful stain on the history of this country, and trust me, there are many rivals for that title. So that's why I've always, back in my Talk Sport days, faced some angry crowds in my demand that we need to make reparation to those communities and those places that suffered the depredations of the piracy, and that's what it was, state piracy of entire peoples and lands in the slave trade. And a very impressive young woman, Juliet Ryan, is working on this year's march and this year's campaign for reparations for the black community. Juliet Ryan, welcome to the show. Tell us about the campaign, please.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate being here today.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, the march is on Monday, as everybody knows.
Well, they know now. What time does it start and where from?
It starts at 10 a.m. and it's Windrush Square in Brixton, London.
Yep.
And it's the African Emancipation Day Reparations March.
Tell us about it.
Right. And the march is phenomenal. I'll just start there. I've attended the march for the last 2 years. And the march is a gathering of thousands and thousands of people. I couldn't tell you how many, because I'm going to be honest with you, my entire life, I think, other than being on the New Cross March, I've never seen so many black people in one place. And that includes the carnival, because it's somewhat different now to what it used to be. And it's a gathering of like-minded people. And it's, people that are fighting for justice. We all want reparations. We want repair. We want internal and external repair. We would like the government to acknowledge what it's done in the past, currently, and the impact it has on us in the future.
Well, you see, a lot of people listening to this appear blissfully unaware of the long-term and enduring consequences of slavery. The fact is that the black people that were stolen from Africa, in the words of the song, were enslaved, and then slavery was abolished and replaced in the United States and in the Caribbean with Jim Crow, segregation, second, third-class citizens, no longer with a chain around your neck, but no nearer to being a normal human being on an equal par with the former slave-owning communities. Subject to racism for 100 years, and until now, all of it traceable back to the notion that one group of people were so superior to another that they were entitled to enchain them, steal them from their families and their country, and put them to work as oxen, free, sold, bought and sold in a marketplace, as if they were oxen. And we're supposed to believe that that's had no impact on today's generations of young black people. Disabuse that, please.
I'll be honest with you, I'm a victim. I'm a victim on every level. I suffer from post-traumatic slavery disorder, and I suffer from post-traumatic slavery syndrome, as has been diagnosed and I'd say identified very clearly by Dr. DeGroy. I would say that 99.9% of our communities do, not just here, but also on the continent. You see, my name is a slave name. It was branded on my ancestors with hot irons. You see, they were chained. They were thrown to the bottom of the sea. They were seen as tonnage. They were seen as cargo. They were seen as disposable. They were seen and treated less than you would treat an animal. And we were taken away from our heritage, taken away from our culture, taken away from our homes, taken away from our families, taken away from our religion, taken away from our education, taken away from ourselves. We've been completely dispossessed, displaced, and annihilated. We have been genocided on a level that is incomparable with any other race on the face of this planet. And not for 100 years, George, but 500 years. The reason why is because the land grabs are still occurring now. What's happening in West Papua is still occurring now. There is slavery in West Papua right here, right now, in 2016, funded by this government, right here, right now, by corporations like BP in this country, right here, right now. You know, let me tell you something. The problems that we face at work, we face racism and discrimination in employment. We face racism and discrimination when we shop. We face racism and discrimination just as we go for a walk down the beach. We face racism and discrimination when we sit on a train. We face racism and discrimination even waiting for a bus. We face racism and discrimination. We do not feel welcome here. I have never, ever felt welcome here. I feel completely at odds in this country. And I want reparations and repatriation. And I think that this government has done us a great disservice. Our community, as a black community, have to rise up against this. Because they want to talk about, there are situations where we can't look at it because of legal situations. That's an excuse. A complete
Well, what's your... Just summarise...
Was in Magna Carta, George?
Yeah. Juliet, summarise the demands of the campaign and the march, will you?
Well, the aim of the march is to draw attention to the African people's global determination not to let the British state and other perpetrators get away with the crimes of the Mangamizi, and that is what we called the Holocaust, because we're not able to use that word, so we call Holocaust because it has been kept for certain people. And of chattel and colonial and neo-colonial enslavement. We want to raise consciousness about the fact that all the attacks on us, both as individuals and as collective peoples, that happen in all instances, especially our attacks on us in the media, where, for example, we are still fighting just to get exposure in the media. And that is why thank you for letting us on this show today. You know, we want a parliamentary investigation. We want a parliamentary inquiry. We want this to be addressed by the government. We want them to take our demands seriously. We want to increase awareness of the necessity to stop the Mangamizi. And Mangamizi means genocide and continuous Holocaust. Yeah, and its current manifestations such as austerity and also all of the other aspects that come with austerity. Because many of us are in gentrified areas where we've lost, our homes or had to move or been moved. There's also the fact that there are attempts to recolonize Africa, which is happening now. There's menticide, there's deaths in police custody, there's psychiatric issues, there's deaths in prison custody, there's high rates of us always being stopped by the police, always being attacked by the police. You know, the negative images that are portrayed of black people constantly by the media.
Well, look, Julia, I have to stop you, not because you were in any way losing my interest. As a matter of fact, I've found your contribution enormously powerful. So that's 10 o'clock at Windrush Square in Brixton on Monday in London. If you can be there, be there. Well, we've just been talking, I think in the most powerful terms, about the issue of slavery and the post-slavery trauma suffered by the descendants of it. And I have seldom heard it put more powerfully than Juliet Ryan, though she did make the point that's her slave name. That's the name that was branded by iron on the skin of her ancestors, stolen from Africa. Martin from Wolverhampton is on the line on this very subject. Martin, welcome.
Good evening, George. I do think that it's important that we never forget the role that Britain played in the African slave trade. Many people just think that it was to do with the what we know as the British West Indies, but actually went beyond that, and Britain played a major role in the transportation of African slaves into Colombia, through Cartagena de las Indias, and into Brazil as well, and. So it was much wider than a lot of people think.
Indeed, and we made a fortune on it. Fortunes which, by and large, still exist today and provided the foundation for very great fortune. Cities like Bristol, like Glasgow, like London, were built on the profits of the slave trade.
Yes, and we're still living with the legacy of the African slave trade today. And until it's widely publicised and there's some sort of memorial and reparation for the past, we're not going to be able to move forward and to be able to tackle racism because that goes right back. That's a legacy of the African slave trade.
It's fundamentally a racist idea that you have the right to seize somebody else, put a chain around their neck, sail them across the 7 seas, work them to death as beasts of burden. What could it be that made you superior and morally right to hold slaves? It can only be racism.
Well, the British were the first to introduced the ideas of racial superiority theories. And they had a hierarchy of races with the Africans and the Australian Aborigines being at the bottom, and the British being at the top of this hierarchy.
Indeed. Look, Martin, thanks for that call in Wolverhampton.
I was just going to say before you go, though, that
be quick, yeah.
If it's okay, that I do think that it's been difficult. It's difficult to talk about the issue of slavery. Because there has actually been a neoliberal strategy to deal with racism, and that is to ignore history and the impact of history, and to try and make racism appear as though it's an act of individual behaviour.
Exactly, a personal aberration. Martin, thanks for that call. David's in London. He's up next. Go ahead, David.
Right, well, first of all, George, I would like to see Condoleezza Rice getting her reparations. That would be good. Secondly, I was in the situation where I've been in Addis Ababa, and I was in a big road called the Bowley Road, and it's like an Oxford Street in Addis Ababa. And on the road, on the sign there, it said, "The Chinese corporation apologised for any inconvenience caused." And I was a bit puzzled by this at first. I thought, why is that in English? And then I realised it was for me to read in English. It wasn't in Amharic, it was in Tigrinya, it was in English. Basically, the Chinese were saying, we're in charge now, we're the colonial masters, you ain't no more. So, what I'm trying to say to you is this: of course, racism is evil, of course, prejudice is wrong, of course, inequality is terrible, but how we challenge that is not by silly ideas about reparations. Who gets the reparations? That lady you spoke to before, yeah, let her heart get in front of her head, yeah, she had the royal big we. Who's we? She ain't we. She doesn't represent the black population. In fact, the argument should be is that only the slaves' descendancies, which we and you could be one of, because we can't trace our ancestors back that low, should be the ones with reparations. What about the rest of Africa, who's been raped and murdered as we speak? That, in fact, as far as racism is concerned, and as far as black prejudice is concerned, which is genuine, which is real, the prejudice exists. We must destroy it. We must challenge it. We must make equality as our goal, of course. Me and you will 100% agree about that, but it's not about reparations. Reparations cause nothing. It doesn't understand the issue that we are actually dealing with. What we're dealing with is colonialism, imperialism, as it was then and as it is now. The Africans that were pushed, you're quite right, in chains, murdered on the way if they weren't fit enough to actually make the journey, were there for capitalism reasons, for no other, and they're still there now. The fact is quite straightforward, George. There are more slaves now in the world than there was during the so-called slave trade.
Why do you say so-called slave trade?
Well, okay, I apologise. Yeah. I shouldn't say that so-called.
No, you shouldn't have. Let me ask you something. Yeah. Are you black, David?
No, I'm not. I'm married to a black woman, if that's any good to you.
No. It's just that you called into question the right of our speaker to speak for black people, yet you are yourself not black. Do you see any... Maybe you want to apologise about that too?
No, because she was making the assumption that she spoke for all black people.
Well, she's got a better shout at it than you.
Well, fair enough, but at the end of the day, I mean, I can't change my colour.
No, you can't, but you ought to be just a little bit more humble when denouncing black people's right to speak for themselves when you yourself are white. Thanks, David. We got your message. Michael is in Leeds. He's up next. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, George. Great to be back on the station again.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that you call Julia, found her speech inspirational. She was obviously very passionate about what she was speaking at.
Yeah, I didn't myself agree with everything that she said.
Yeah.
But I must say it touched my heart and it touched my head.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to say, like, I do appreciate passion. I'm not in any way downplaying what she said. Like, you know, I fought for inequality myself. I wanted to say that I spent some time out in Russia and the amount of racism and inequality there is disgusting against Central Asian people and also against gay people, as I'm sure you've experienced yourself from your time out there, the law against propaganda, and fought for gay rights myself out there because I feel that inequality in any creed against different races or sexualities or whatever is a terrible thing, and we should fight against it.
Well, of course I'm against all bigotry and discrimination against anyone on the basis of what they are, not what they do, but what they are. I've got to tell you that 50 yards from Lenin's tomb in Red Square, Moscow, is a rather thriving gay club, belting out YMCA as I passed it.
Yeah, is this propaganda?
No, I stood outside it.
Okay, right. No, I mean the club was called Propaganda.
Sorry, I don't know what it was called. I just know
No,
that it was.
anyway.
I just know it was a gay club, and they were belting out YMCA.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, my God, Lenin will be turning in his tomb 50 yards away.
Absolutely, yeah. But I was just going to say that, like, of all the news and everything that's happened in America recently, and the shootings involving black people and everything, that although, you know, I do appreciate Julia's passion and everything like that, in some ways I have to challenge it, because I feel that in the UK, in many ways, we lead the way towards inequality when you take if you look outside the UK and you take a more
Well, that's very self-satisfying for you, I'm sure. Trust me on this, there aren't many black people in the country would agree with you. Not many black people in this country think we're leading the way on dealing with the post-slavery trauma of racism and discrimination. That I'm afraid, is an illusion on your part.
But but I've challenged that in many other countries that they're far less progressive towards inequality.
You know this, nothing gets me down more than whataboutery. We are not as bad as them over there. Mm-hmm. We are here. You're British. I'm British. Yes. I'm talking to the people of Britain right now. Let's talk about us, not point a finger and say, him over there, he's worse. Michael, thanks for the call. David is in Rose Hill. Let's hear from him. David, go ahead.
You got it wrong there, George. It's Primrose Hill. Shalom, salam. I haven't spoken to you for a while.
It's not my fault. It's the men through the glass. They put it up as Rose Hill. Anyway, go ahead. You're running out of time. Go ahead.
Right. Now, the first slaves around that we read about are the ones you read in the Bible that came out of Egypt, Moses and his mob. And the second one was celebrating the Last Supper, was Jesus himself, which was also celebrating the escape of the Jews. I'm a Jew, and it's very bad to go around worrying because your relatives got gassed in a gas chamber.
Why? There's nothing wrong with that at all. And we're still making reparation for that, as we should. If people have been...
The point of the song that you played was, free yourself from emancipate yourself from mental slavery.
Quite so.
That means do not let those things that from the past pull you down from the present. Your energy in the present comes from staying in the present, not in the past or the future. Therefore, you have greater power over the things that are around you. You should know that, George. You're an intelligent guy.
Well, David, if you're saying to me that the Jewish people should forget, should put behind them, should move on from the systematic, industrialized annihilation of millions of Jews at the hands of European fascism, if you're telling me that the right thing to do is to move on from that, to turn the page on that, I simply will never accept that, David.
I'm not saying that.
It sounded to me like you were saying that.
No, it sounded like it, but that's only part of the thing. The point is, you can use that as an excuse and think that everybody's doing it to you. And you walk along with a complex thinking they don't like me because I'm a Jew, they don't like me because I'm a black.
But that's often true. Racism works like that.
George, allow me to say one thing. In South Central LA, 150 black and women who are prostitutes and on crack cocaine were murdered by a guy called Lonnie. The police did not do anything at all because it was a black neighbourhood in the hood. If it would have happened in Beverly Hills and one person would have been murdered, they'd have been down in 2 seconds. Although it's not perfect, the system we've got, and we can work to improve it. Black people, and I worked in Brixton for 30 years. I love all my friends are West Indian, and I know how they feel about these things, and I could find common sympathy through my own heritage with them. I loved them. When I left there, they said, Dave, nobody leave, man. You is a very nice man. You has been very nice to everybody. I even got the accent. And I'll tell you one thing, black people are still a lot better off at making progress. And when I see them successful in business, in writing, on the television, those are the things I look up.
Well, David, I don't know quite where to start on that. Just let me point out to you that you don't quite have the accent. Soccer is Alive says some workers in this day and age are treated with little respect and paid poor wages, all down to power and greed. That's absolutely correct, but it's not the same thing as slavery. Mark Holden says George is on form tonight, so glad I'm tuned in. Thanks for that, Mark. Ian Gaston says, correct, let's get back to Labour. That's as opposed to New Labour. And Moon says, AHs come in all colours. In my life, they've been mainly white and Tory. The worst, however, pretend to be Labour. And David says, well done, George, in handling some of these spoof callers. It's a mad, mad world. Well, I don't think that Andy Slaughter's was quite a spoof call. It was certainly memorable for all of the wrong reasons. He said he didn't know what a YouTube car crash interview was. Well, he does now. He said that he didn't know if it was true that a lot of people would listen to my interview with him. Well, he knows now. And he didn't have any answers on behalf of his master, his fellow collaborator in the coup against Corbyn. He didn't effectively do any good for Owen Smith tonight at all. And maybe that's something that his friends need to reflect on. Now, Hillary Clinton is the nominee. Let's hear how it came about.
Tonight, we've reached a milestone in our nation's march toward a more perfect union. The first time that a major party has nominated a woman for president. Our country's motto is E pluribus unum. Out of many, we are one. Will we stay true to that motto? Well, we heard Donald Trump's answer last week at his convention. He wants to divide us from the rest of the world and from each other. He wants us to fear the future and fear each other. I sweat the details of policy, whether we're talking about the exact level of lead in the drinking water in Flint, Michigan, the number of mental health facilities in Iowa, or the cost of your prescription drugs. Because it's not just a detail if it's your kid, if it's your family. It's a big deal. And it should be a big deal to your president, too. And we will help you balance family and work. And you know what? If fighting for affordable child care and paid family leave is playing the woman card, then deal me in. Do you really think Donald Trump has the temperament to be commander-in-chief? Donald Trump can't even handle the rough and tumble of a presidential campaign. He loses his cool at the slightest provocation. Imagine him in the Oval Office facing a real crisis. A man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons.
Well, that's Hillary Clinton. She's the boss of the Democratic Party now. Bernie Sanders duly fell in behind her. And so the die is cast. Not for me, I'm supporting Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, but the die is cast for the most part in the United States now, and it's Donald J. Trump versus HRC, Hillary Rodham Clinton, or Hillary Rotten Clinton, as some have it. Now, our sage, John Le Boutillier, who's helped us through many, many, many political seasons in the United States, former congressman, a Republican, and a very, very wise man, is on the line. John, how did she do?
Hello, George.
Hi.
I think, first of all, I think Hillary is not a great candidate or great public speaker. So if I look at her, I would say she did a B+. I don't think she's capable of a home run or an A like Obama or Mrs. Obama on Monday, who was
she was tremendous,
terrific.
Pity
they had
she
a great
run.
line. Well, she could, but she chose not to. But they had a great line on one of the TV commentators on Monday night that Mrs. Obama's speech was so good that I would expect to see it in 4 years at the next Republican convention.
It's the plagiarism, yes.
Yeah.
So she was a B+ in terms of delivery. She is up against a bit of a straw man in the sense that Trump is very easy to lampoon and very easy to raise people's anxieties about. But a considerable part of the Democratic activist base walked out, literally in some cases, metaphorically in others. How much is that going to hurt them?
Well, in the end, she's got to be able to unify that party, and not that much did walk out. I mean, I think when all is said and done, 85% of Sanders voters will vote for Hillary in November because they're running against Trump. I think that Trump to the Democrats is so toxic, so radioactive, so dangerous that all Democrats will hold their nose and vote for someone that they really don't like, Hillary. She's unlikable and untrustworthy even among the Democrats, but they'll take her over Trump.
Any skeletons rattling that might fall out of the cupboard between now and November that could yet derail her campaign?
Well, one of them is this rumor that there are more emails to come from the group that was released by Julian Assange on Sunday.
Yeah.
He says he's got more, and he uses the word indictment. I don't quite know in what sense. Does he have things that could somehow get Hillary indicted?
He implies that. WikiLeaks implied that. But they also said that they'd release this before the end of the DNC, but they haven't yet, have they? And I suppose the convention is over, is it?
Convention's over. She is the official nominee. You could, if you have something good, now's the time to get it out, because it would put the Democrats in terrible shape because they can't get rid of Hillary easily if there really is something that bad. That's the one thing that could derail her.
What about the what they used to call, in less politically correct days, bimbo eruptions around her husband, Bill Clinton, former president? Any more likely to come on that front?
I don't think so, George. I think that what he does and has done and might do is not going to take her down. He does still cavort. We know that. He has parties in the Clinton Library in his apartment up on the penthouse with all sorts of women up there, and it's been reported casually about it. But I don't think he can take her down. I think that it's now Hillary and her behavior, and I don't think she'll make a lot of mistakes, by the way. I think she's a very disciplined candidate. She reads from a script. She doesn't go off the cuff. She's the opposite of Trump, who's completely undisciplined. You never know what's going to come out of his mouth. And during the convention, during the Democratic convention, he goes and steps all over the story by this amazing little riff about Putin and asking Putin to hack into her emails and give them out. And he's gotten so criticized for that. He's trying to come back and say, oh, I was just speaking sarcastically.
A joke, yeah.
But he wasn't. I mean, I saw the thing on TV. He was very serious.
Wow. Now, the Republican bigwigs, yourself included, I infer from the fact you watched it on TV, stayed away from the Republican convention, so they're still divided. The Democrats, as you say, most of them will now unite behind the candidate. The Democrats are the bigger party in any case. They should normally win elections when all things are equal. Are you looking at the danger for the Republicans of a landslide?
Well, in our number, the way we do it numerically, a landslide is 55-45. I wouldn't rule that out, but I doubt it. I think I think that Hillary should be able to win a healthy majority in the Electoral College. You need 270. I think she'll get close to 285, 290, somewhere in there. For instance, yesterday a new poll of Pennsylvania came out, 20 electoral votes. Democrats always win it, have won it for 30 years. And she was ahead by 9 points, matching another poll earlier in the week where she was ahead by 9 points.
And on her coattails, many new senators, congresspeople?
Well, not in Pennsylvania. The Senate race there's a freshman Republican, Pat Toomey. He's 7 points ahead of the Democrat. So in that case, if you go just by these polls, and it's only July, no coattails in that race. But I'm not sure. There's so many Senate races where Republicans are in tight races. If Hillary ends up winning, could she sweep them could she get them 4 Senate seats? I mean, I would think the answer would be yes, actually.
Now,
Wisconsin's one of them, where our guy's behind by a lot.
Looking ahead, what would President Clinton II be like in your view?
I actually think that she will attempt to work with the Republicans quite heavily. She did it as a U.S. Senator. And if she has a Republican House, let's just say she has a Republican Senate, she's going to have no choice but to try to work with them to get anything passed. And then the question is, will they work with her? They really did not cooperate with Obama. If, on the other hand, it's a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, so she's got 2/3 of this thing, the White House and the Senate, then I think she'll get more aggressive. And depending on the margin in the House of Representatives, might try to go over the House's head and convert a few seats like the way Reagan did. When I was in, Reagan was able to get what he wanted through a Democratic House of Representatives by getting some Democrats to vote for him on major bills like the tax cut, military rebuilding, and all that. Maybe she could do some of that, but we're a ways away. We have to now start thinking of the first debate, because I think that's the next signpost along the way that's crucial here. That when you asked if I could see Hillary winning by a landslide, well, the easier way to answer that is how do they do in that first debate? If she crushes him in the first debate, then I think you're looking at a possible landslide.
He'll try and monster her, won't he?
Well, everybody's game planning. What is he going to do? And we got to think. You've done debates. I've done debates as a candidate. It's a very tricky thing how you behave on TV in a debate. And then I've never run against a woman. But I saw what happened here in New York State when Hillary ran for the Senate in 2000 against a man, Rick Lazio, a congressman, and he did not know how to debate Hillary, and he walked across the stage to hand her a piece of paper as an exhibit. Said, hey, well, look at this, what do you think of this? And even that, he was criticized for it.
It looked aggressive.
Aggressive and invading her space, as they called it.
Yeah.
Trump, first of all, Trump doesn't know anything, George. He's going to have to talk. You figure it's an hour and a half, the debate. So this is the first one, which is usually in September. So you figure you subtract 15 minutes for questions, introductions, biographies, all that nonsense, and you have an hour and 15 minutes, and divide that in half. That's 37 minutes each for Hillary and Trump to talk over the course of that debate. Now, what could Trump possibly say in 37 and a half minutes? He can't talk for 3 minutes about any issue. He doesn't know anything. And you can't just make faces and gesticulate, roll your eyes, and mock someone. That won't work.
Not over 37 minutes.
Nope.
When is the first debate, John?
No, it hasn't been set yet.
Are we talking weeks?
Yeah, I would say 7 weeks from now.
We'll definitely have to review that, preview it, and then review it with you. But we'll talk to you again before that, I'm sure. John Labutillier, our sage in the United States, thanks very much indeed, as always, for joining us. Catherine Higgins has tweeted, I feel so sorry for USA right now. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are a mess. My US friends do not deserve this. And Peter in Glasgow says, please can you mention the hospitals being bombed by the coalition of the killing today in Syria, killing the children, indeed. And Peter also mentions whoever holds the photos wields the power. James Ball says the effects of the slave trade are still destroying lives today, and it's never seriously discussed by the powers. Soccer is Alive is back, and he says, true, New Labour was more conservative than the Conservatives when Mr. Blair was the leader. And another says, certainly slavery certainly had an effect on places like Liverpool, where many a large pile was built off the backs of these souls. Absolutely true. Let's go to the aforementioned Liverpool and talk with John. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, it's just I just listening to your shows. I listen to you regularly, actually.
Thank you.
I think it's great. I think it's really good. I think it's really open debate, and it's good to see a medium giving someone like you the opportunity. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks.
There's been a lot going on. You know, a lot of talk about the slave trade tonight. I just wanted to highlight in Liverpool there's a maritime museum at the Albert Dock.
Yeah.
Which displays really, really good information about what went on and the atrocity that was the slave trade, and from which a lot of people.
And by the way, John, there isn't a similar museum in London, which
right.
is truly extraordinary, actually.
It's very extraordinary, but in fact, George, what you said was right. It was a Liverpool-orientated initiative, mainly. So it's great that a city like Liverpool is prepared to admit to that and display exactly what went on. And going there, it's quite an emotional thing. It's sort of the Auschwitz of Liverpool, if you like. It has that kind of credibility, and it's really, really open. I would recommend that to anyone.
I'm in Liverpool on the 7th of August, and I'm going to go and visit it. I intended doing that, but you've reminded me, so thanks for that. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. But I just wanted to say, the emphasis on apology is a good one. I'm thinking of David Cameron when he apologised for the atrocities of Japan and et cetera, and all the things that we've done in the past in our, if you like, our hierarchy of society. But I think it's an important point that you make, and I think what is important is that we realise that the decisions through history that have caused so much suffering for people, because I believe that all people are generally equal, is carried out by the elite of society and not the majority of people who, in the main want to just concentrate on having a happy lifestyle and looking after their children and their own lifestyle. And I think these things are always driven from above. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, of course, the people at the top benefited the most, but all of us benefited to some extent. Britain's wealth, squeezed out of the blood, sweat and tears of the slaves, did benefit everyone, albeit grotesquely unequally. But our national wealth, our public realm, the great streets and great buildings in Liverpool, in Glasgow, in Bristol, in London, all of us benefited from them. We are a rich country, and the countries from which we took the slaves, and the countries to which we sent the slaves in the Caribbean, are poor countries, and we are rich.
No, I agree, absolutely. But I think we benefit in ignorance, because I think, we don't, as a people or as a public, understand the issues in society and the way things are. And I think we're sort of blinkered you know, your show opens the eyes to a lot of people, but it's only got so much of a catchment, if you like, or so much of a catchment population. And it's that sort of thing that we need to get across, because, and I'm not talking about revolution or rioting or that kind of thing. What I'm talking about is an understanding that generally the people who we elect to make the decisions do not represent the thoughts of many normal people. And that is, to me, what I find. That is because what I wanted to say to you was I'm apolitical. You know, I don't vote. But I was telling your researcher before, listening to you and what you're saying about Jeremy Corbyn, I joined the Labour Party to make sure that everyone had a left-wing option. And in choosing that option, that was up to them, and I would leave that down to them. But what I'm encouraged by you is that I was thinking I'll get him in power and then I'll pull out of the Labour Party. But listening to you and your commitment, I would be prepared now, from an apolitical point of view, to stay within the Labour Party to ensure that what Jeremy says he's going to do, he will do.
You're a good man, John. I hope you come along and see me at the Fact Cinema on the 7th of August, and everyone else, all my friends in Liverpool too. Thanks for that really clever call and sincere one too. Let's go to Laura in London.
Yeah, hi, good evening to you, George. I went to your movie the other night.
Oh, did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did.
Thank you very much.
I didn't enjoy John McTiernan, but I enjoyed your film, yes.
Well, thank you very much. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, about the US, is there any dirt to come? Well, at least 3 different law firms or attorneys have filed lawsuits for election fraud against the DNC, against Debbie Wasserman and all the rest.
Yes, I was asking John if any of these were likely to come to pass. I guess his take is that they probably aren't enough to halt Clinton in her tracks. Unless WikiLeaks have got something up their sleeve that we don't yet know. I'm a bit dismayed that the promise to deliver it before the end of the Democratic Convention hasn't been kept, but maybe they're saving it up for another day. Anyway, go on, Laura.
What I would really love is if you're able to interview over the next week or so any one of those 3 lawyers who filed the lawsuits. And the convention, the DNC convention, was a charade. At least 700 actors were hired at $50 per night to fill the seats and to cheer and to look like Clintonites.
Is that true? Where did you get that?
Well, there's pictures of the tweets, etc., and there's footage from inside the hall.
That's quite damning, I must say.
Oh, that's just one small molecule of information. There's loads. I've been doing my own research on this. It's all disgusting. And one of the attorneys who's filed lawsuits actually went to the DNC convention and saw some of the stuff himself. I really would hope that you interview either Bob Fitrakis or Cliff Arnbeck or Jared Beck, or those are 3 of the attorneys who know something about something.
All right, I'll make sure that the men behind the glass, and they are actually all men, alas, take careful note of that for next week. By the way, I don't have researchers. Ibrar says on Twitter, slavery still exists, especially in the Persian Gulf states. That's undoubtedly true. Lane says of the contribution from our speaker on slavery and reparations earlier, what a phenomenally powerful call from a very strong and inspirational woman. And Maureen Sharkey says, George, you're a wee star. Your loyalty is something else. Kiss, kiss. Well, thanks for that, Maureen, but less of the wee. Less of the wee. Here's Paul in East London. He's up next. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, good evening, George. It's always refreshing and rewarding to hear honest white men. It's being born in East London and growing up in East London at an early age or whatever. But if I have to be honest, I did meet some honest, some decent white people who I live with, who were just honest and decent. But the truth of the matter is reparations is necessary, because reparations basically means repair. And someone asked me today, well, what damage has been done? Well, the damage which has been done is colonialism, and what we call the Mayarfa, which is the long history of slavery and its effects, which today, continue to be played out. And there's another aspect of which is not really talked about, is the role the Jews played in slavery. That's not talked about at all, and it's as if suggested that it.
Well, of course, there were all kinds of people involved in the slave trade, and the overwhelming majority of them were not Jews. They were white business people, traders, shippers, and people who owned the plantations to which the slaves were put to work as beasts of burden, as commodities. They were entered in ledgers as I've got 15 cows, 14 sheep, 13 slaves, and this slave I bought for this money, but with depreciation and because of his age and because he never had any children, he's only worth so much now. When you read these things, it is not just mind-boggling in its immorality from a country, a society that even then paraded its Christianity on its sleeve. What is more extraordinary is that we're expected now, or black people are expected now, just to turn the page on it. That's my point, Paul.
Well, I can't speak for all black people, but it's certainly the page will not be turned on it. I mean, the mere fact that we're still talking about it today, the mere fact that we haven't forgotten and we are talking about reparations, not just in this country, the organisation CARICOM, so Hilary Beckles, who represents our organisation from Barbados, and other groups around the world, are awakening to the fact that damage has been done and damage is continuing to be done, and we need it addressed, and it's not going to go away, and it's not going to end until it is redressed. I mean, my children certainly, I make sure that they understand what the situation is, how we feel about it, and what they need to do, and they will continue, even if it's not done today, if it's not done tomorrow, it will be continued until the situation is addressed. I mean, how can one expect to cause so much damage and think and just suggest that you just turn the page and forget about it? That's ridiculous. Nothing happens like that.
Indeed, don't forget the march on Monday at 10 a.m. from Windrush Square in Brixton. If you're a supporter of the campaign, as I am, for reparation, making good, making repair of the horrific situation that we have left in our wake after the slave trade. Balder the Brave says, in all my years of listening to radio, never have I heard anyone stand up for black people like George Galloway. How is he not an MP? Thank you for that. And I'm only briefly not an MP. Bass Spieler says, for the first time in 30 years, Jeremy Corbyn has made me want to engage in Labour. Honest, straightforward politics. Scary? Well, that's the point that I've been making about Jeremy Corbyn right from the very beginning. He is a good and honest man. And if there's no room at the top in politics for a good and honest man, then God save us. Moon says a strong Corbyn opposition, even if it loses an election, is better than an elected Labour, which is quasi-Tory. Certainly in the medium term, that's absolutely true. Tony Blair won 3 elections and destroyed Labour in the process. Will I Am said some MPs need to stop scoring own goals or change parties. Well, they may very well be planning to do that. Someone mentioned Jez Phillips earlier. She's apparently an MP in Birmingham, who alluded, I don't think she said explicitly, but alluded in the week that she's for the off really and has had enough of being in a party where she's not wanted. And I think it's fair to say that most in the party don't want her. Challenge Government says, I've worked in West Africa for years and seen with my own eyes the castles built with the blood of its people. And Helen Robinson says, I feel such a sense of shame at the part our ancestors played in this history, and modern slavery still happens. Andy Siddons says people want a real party alternative, not the establishment elite carousel that is Tory stroke Labour. That's absolutely correct. And Scott's on the line in Glasgow. He's up next. Go ahead, Scott.
Hi, George. Nice to speak to you.
And you, sir?
Thank you. I'd like to say it's quite refreshing and I hope that Jeremy Corbyn would go on to be our next Prime Minister eventually. With his views on the Trident missile system to get rid of it, I believe it's a burden to our nation. And I don't know who we think we are, trying to police the world and say that we're okay to have them when other nations aren't.
It's just a virility symbol, isn't it? It can't be used. It could only be used in circumstances of national suicide. If we fired the weapons, that could only be a precursor to other people firing their weapons at us, and therefore it would be our last act as a people. So it can't be used, and therefore it's just a way of showing that we're still big boys with big ones, no?
Yeah, I believe that's what it is, and I don't want as well on my conscience if it comes to the point where we are being attacked, that the last thing that will go through my mind is that we are killing innocent men, women and children in another nation who probably haven't had their finger on the button. It's been the government who's fired at us.
Tell me this, I saw an opinion poll, I didn't get a chance to look more closely into it, so it might not be all that credible, but it did strike me as interesting. They did a poll in Scotland about what Scottish people thought should happen to Trident, and roughly a third supported the scrapping of the weapons and the submarines. Roughly a third supported keeping the submarines without the weapons, and roughly a third supported keeping both the submarines and the weapons. And yet, according to the SNP, who are completely hegemonic in Scottish politics, you would have thought that Scotland was overwhelmingly against the presence of Trident in the country. What's your take on that?
Well, the SNP for me, I did vote yes, George. I know you're not a man who agrees with that, but I did myself. But the SNP are not a party who speaks for me. I don't believe in a lot of their views. But I do believe, in my opinion, we should scrap the entire thing. I think it's a waste of money when we have people from around there I live, like Castlemilk, Fernhill, and a lot of Glasgow who are in such deprivation.
Well, that's absolutely true. We've got a million people at least eating out of food banks, but we can find £100 billion to spend on new nuclear weapons. We do, of course, have to defend ourselves, but you could get a lot more defence for your buck in conventional weaponry than you can in nuclear weaponry, and the difference being you would at least be able to use that.
I would rather see our boys fully equipped, George, with the correct armour and weapons and vehicles that they could use that were a bit less indiscriminate in attacking.
Exactly. Let's have a national defence as opposed to a national offence. Scott, been a pleasure talking to you. Frank is in Manchester. He's up next. Go ahead, Frank.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Basically, one thing I would like to point out is that, like, when people talk about the slave trade, they do. It seems to be spoken about as if it's something that is only in the past. And I think it's important that we remember in places like Africa and in Southeast Asia, a lot of companies were set up, during the slave trade era to exploit those places and those workers that still exist to this day. I'm talking like the De Beers mining cartel, for example, who, they pay poor wages to their workers, make a lot of money. And I also think it's important as well that a lot of our stuff that, we have, that we take for granted, our footwear, our clothes, are made by slave workers. Reparations are good, for the past, but I think we should also try and make more of an effort to stamp out the slavery that exists.
Frank, you make a powerful point, but it's not right, and I have to deal with it. Forgive me if
Yes.
I do so over harshly.
No,
There is a qualitative difference, a complete difference, a difference not just of scale, but of category between a worker who is being super exploited on low wages in modern capitalist enterprise and a person who is stolen by force, chained in a boat, sent to another continent, oceans away, and put to work as a piece of property belonging to the slave owner. That's not the same thing, Frank.
I know. I'll be honest, I wasn't actually expecting to get on, so I didn't actually think up like what I was going to say. If I am totally honest, George, I do take that point that like one is a super exploited worker, one is treated as property. In my mind, neither are great. Neither are right. I personally would treat it the same, to be honest. Whether you pay them, in fact, I have heard stories actually that some of these people who do get sent down the mines are literally just taken and thrown in and threatened. But
no, there's no doubt that in our own country, never mind in poor countries, that there are millions of workers across the world, probably hundreds of millions of workers that are treated in the most abominable way, paid the least that the employer can possibly get away with, only enough to keep the worker strong enough to come back to work the next day to make still more profit. That undoubtedly is the case, and it's the case for even many workers in our own country. And that's a separate issue. It's one that I've spent my whole life fighting on, but it's a separate issue from slavery. Frank, thanks. You've been a gentleman in Manchester. Thanks very much for calling me. Levi Jordan says, and such times, that's the slavery times, were referenced in the great days of the empire at the Queen's 90th birthday. Disgraceful. And Godfather 1981 says, there seems to be a thirst for blood and a warped hunger for nuclear weapons in the UK. Didn't we invade a country on suspicion of WMDs? Indeed we did. The same man says we're a country of hypocrites on the issue of weapons of mass destruction. The biggest threat to the UK is the UK, in my opinion. And Cool Daddy says, shame that Sanders sold out to Hillary and his supporters. I know it. Will Dr. Jill Stein be a dark horse? Well, I know her well. She's an outstanding candidate. She's the candidate of the Green Party. She is a woman. She is Jewish. She is a scientist. She is as polished a presidential candidate as you will ever find in any country in any election. She is wonderfully articulate. She answers every question and is as qualified as anyone who's ever run for the presidency of the United States. And the policies that she stands for are qualitatively different and better than all the other candidates in the field. She is a real Democrat. She's a real Republican. She's a real anti-racist. She's a real anti-war candidate. She's a candidate for the poor. She promises an amnesty on student debt to every young person in America. If she were to be the President of the United States, frankly, the world would be unrecognizable compared to what it is today. Now, the Green Party are an important party in the United States. They have many, many supporters. They have millions of voters and hundreds of thousands of members. And Dr. Jill Stein has raised phenomenal amounts of money in small sums from donors all across the United States. If we could get her onto the presidential debates alongside Clinton and alongside Trump, well, trust me, her appeal would spread like wildfire. But there's a big but. Big money in the politics of the United States ensures that the duopoly, the two halves of a pantomime horse, and there's no prizes for guessing who's the arse end of that pantomime horse. That's what we're going to be treated to. A fake dichotomy between two people who represent the same people, who represent the same sliver of 1% of the people of the United States. Both of them are warmongers. Both of them will make the world a more dangerous and even more unstable place. Both of them will protect Wall Street rather than Main Street. Neither of them give a damn about ordinary working people of all colours. And they certainly don't give a damn about the great issues that we've been discussing here tonight. The legacy of slavery, for example. Bill Clinton is responsible for the fact that a small nation of black people are in U.S. penitentiaries. He is responsible for the fact that a black kid is much more likely to be in prison than in university. He is responsible from his 3 strikes and you're out policy for the mass incarceration of black people in America. And Clinton, followed by Obama, followed by Clinton, are, even though they are Democrats, are still the class, the political class, that is presiding over the mass killing of black people by the agents of the state in uniform everywhere you look in the United States. Now, I did promise that I'd say something about Big Brother, only because my dear friend Denny, who runs this station, asked me to, because it's not something that I talk about normally. But I see that it has started again. I see that it is a parade of the second and third rate, unknowns, unnamed, unrecognizable, Z-list celebrities. There are 1 or 2 figures of note. James Whale, once of this parish, who got me into radio in an important regard. I used to regularly be a guest on his show. And when I came out of the Big Brother house in 2006, in early 2006, when I walked out, I was signed up immediately by TalkSport to begin presenting a show, and the rest is history. So I owe a debt to James Whale. He's a big and significant figure in British broadcasting history. He's a very crotchety man, very difficult man, and I'm not sure how he'll cope with the incarceration that now awaits him. I was in it for 22 days and nights. Just so you know, the isolation is total. There is not a single sound or sight from outside that you will see during your time there. It is like being in a capsule, with a lot of other people, many of whom are picked to drive you mad, as indeed you may well drive them mad. I went in there thinking that I would write a novel in my head, because of course pens and paper and so on are not allowed. And by the end, I was fretting about where he or she got that tobacco, which they didn't have yesterday. That's how mad it gets you. I raised a very, very substantial sum of money for Palestinian children in Gaza. When people ask me why I did it, I tell them that there are many thousands of Palestinian children got shoes that they wouldn't otherwise have had if I hadn't gone in the Big Brother house. People ask me why I pretended to be a cat. I did so because if I hadn't, I would have been thrown out of the house and I would have lost the money for the charity for the children in Gaza. And I would have deprived my fellow housemates of food. My fault was not in being a cat on Big Brother, but on being just too good and persuasive a cat. Would you like me to to be the cat. I've been George Galloway. This has been the mother of all talk shows. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you.